how can you get to something that looks like a strategy within those contexts, and what else needs to be pinned down more solidly for that strategy to become, let's say, a bit more meaningful rather than just we want to be in Russia. So who would like to start? Okay, Steffen.
Can do that first, introducing myself. My Russian is not yet that good after 6 months here, but I like being in Russia and in nice St. Petersburg, and I start thinking, eating, sleeping like a Russian, so I think it will come down the line. So strategy for me is probably the most misused word on this planet. Everybody talks about strategy for this, strategy for that. But my belief is strategy is basically identifying and selecting the pattern of activities that will maximize your chances of reaching your goal. So it implicitly tells that if you don't have any goals, strategy is meaningless. And what I have seen here in Russia at least is that the government here has expressed its goals. So when you look at like Health 2020, when you look at Pharma 2020, at least this country has some clear aspirations of where it wants to go. And with my international background, I have to say that being in also 10 years in Central Eastern Europe, I think it's seldom, when you look around the globe at countries, finding governments that clearly express their aspirations and clearly articulate them. So I think...
Well, so you've been in many countries in what we used to call Eastern Europe as part of your brief before coming here. So were there situations where there was no expression of will and it was impossible to make a strategy, and compared with situations where you could see what the national strategy was and work within that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I've been in markets where the only focus was kind of price cuts and price reductions, right?
For instance, where?
That has been evident in like Hungary. During my time in Hungary, that has been part of what I saw in Czech. So my point is at least that when the goal is clear and when the aspiration is clear, then I think as an innovative industry, we can step in and offer our expertise. We can give the innovative products that this country needs. So I just wanted to make that point, that it's at least a good starting point to understand the aspirations of the country you are in.
So the other panelists feel that the strategy here at a national level is clear, or where does it need to be clarified? Michael, maybe I can bring you in.
I think the strategy is reasonably clear. As always, it's down to how these things are interpreted. I mean, we saw just 2 weeks ago with this shift on the EDL going from being 50% by 2020 to 90% by 2018. The question is that the EDL list of 2012 or the EDL list of 2018? Is it value? Is it volume? There's lots of kind of question marks in there, but you can get hung up on those things, I think, a little bit too much. For me, the fundamentals of the Russian market are here in terms of there is demand for better healthcare. There is an acknowledgement by the government that there needs to be an improvement in life expectancy. So all of these various fundamentals will come together. I think for any major pharmaceutical company, actually any pharmaceutical company here, the question is building the necessary capabilities within your organization and making sure you've got the appropriate data and evidence to support your products, whether it is in a retail segment or whether it is in a reimbursement segment. Those are things that you need. But like I say, I wouldn't get too hung up on kind of the Pharma 2020 and the nitty-gritty.
So you don't think, as Jostein was implying, that reimbursement is the key or a key to developing this market? You can do it regardless.
Reimbursement is going to be a major driver for sure because there is the need there. But is that going to happen in 2014, which is when the previous Minister of Health said it was going to happen? Will it be earlier? Will it be later? It will come at some stage.
So patience maybe is one of the, and flexibility.
That there is a basic need.
Naira, did you want to come in? Because I know you have some views about the way in which strategy is formed.
Yeah, I think before we start discussing a strategy, whether it's right or wrong from a corporation point of view, maybe the first question is Russia a right place to be in? Is it a place to invest? And I think this is the very, very key questions where usually our headquarters are asking. And of course, in terms of assessment on the investment mood here, it's very important to find a right balance between challenges and opportunities. Of course, what just been articulated, Russia is definitely a country of the huge opportunities. It's a lot of unmet needs here. We have really a lot of punch of the healthcare problem, and there's acknowledgement of the government that we have this healthcare problem, and there's a willingness to invest more and more. However, there are a couple of things which we need to maybe manage better in order to increase the presence of Russia in a global landscape, in order to be more competitive with other BRIC countries. Because I truly believe that Russia is a short-term opportunity emerging market, while China and India is a more medium and long-term emerging market opportunity, because we have a more medium-class share of the medium-income households.
Right.
And we have a more willingness from government to invest, indeed, in healthcare, and clearly articulated strategy, indeed. I fully agree. However, there are a couple of other things. One is fully unpredictable environment, which makes a little bit investors nervous, because it's clear that investors, they lack predictability. And of course, transparency. I think if we can rightfully manage these two things, we may become maybe even the best place to invest in a short term.
So if I understand what you're saying about Russia being in a short-term prospect, it's because you already have the sufficient economic development in a way that China and India don't, and I guess Brazil would also be in the same category as Russia in that regard. So we don't have to wait for that economic development to happen. What needs to happen then perhaps is more further increases in the healthcare budget and so forth. Is that what we're speaking about here?
Yeah.
Can I bring you in?
Yeah, so my comment will be a little bit similar to what Michael said. Is fundamentally there is a high unmet medical need in Russia. Life expectancy is 68 or 70. Birth rate in 90s was very low, so we are facing the problem of working force 10 years from now. And the strategy that this government put in place, it's relatively clear, and it's a very ambitious goal, to be honest. Creating an innovative-driven industry by 2020, it's a very ambitious goal in such a short period of time. Now, down the road is a lot of questions where you need to move from a strategy to operating model that can support everybody functioning within the environment in order to achieve that long-term strategy and the goals. And here, I think there is a lot to be improved, especially in the transparency and predictability of environmental changes that are happening. We are industry that requires predictability if we want to ensure quality and access to the products. And as an industry which wants to provide that, we need predictability of how this strategy will be implemented in everyday life. Now, when you talk about what is the major goal of achieving that strategy, I think it's enabling access to medicines to the patients. You can do that through reimbursement, you can do it through the price programs, you can do in a different ways, but access to medicines for quite significant part of Russian population is still limited, or it's not. You can talk here about innovations, which are incremental vehicle to innovation of medicines, healthcare modernization program, which brings that innovation and improve treatment of healthcare, or you can talk about different current tools, which are, products that have generics, current system of healthcare, which then needs to be improved and better systemized so that patients can easily reach doctors, get medicines, get high quality treatment in order to improve that overall healthcare situation in Russia and bring that 2020 both healthcare as well as the industry strategy, because both of them are very much connected and one cannot survive without another.
So for you, the circumstances, the environment, the market, if you will, is sufficiently clear to be able to forge and convince your corporate bosses elsewhere that you can adopt a company strategy in Russia that is actually going to be effective, because some of the variables, the uncertainties are, the intention is clear, the uncertainties will still remain in places, but there's enough there for you to be able to map out a corporate strategy within that.
So I would say that government ambitions and opportunity is clear enough of the size so that I'm able to convince my headquarters why to be in Russia. Now, related to implementation of that, there are certain, as you said, uncertainties which would make our industry operating much more, I don't want to say smoother, but in a much more efficient way, improving healthcare situation in Russia if that uncertainty would be somehow removed from the market.
And what would your priorities be there? What would your priorities be there?
Was said transparency of regulatory process, clarity on what the GMP is, clinical trials, and a lot of things that was mentioned in the interview just before this session, where the whole system would, I think, operate much more efficient, bringing, as I said, faster medicines to the patient and increasing access.
Michael, you want to come in again?
Could I just actually build on what Nenad's just raised? I mean, we heard this morning about Fiocruz. I think Fiocruz is an excellent example. GSK has got a very long collaboration with Fiocruz in the field of vaccines through tech transfers. About 2 years ago, we signed an agreement with Fiocruz for the transfer of pneumococcal vaccine, Synflorix, in Brazil, which was introduced again 2 years ago. This is a 10-year deal, it's a 10-year agreement. Now in Russia currently with the federal procurement law, it's currently restricted to a 1-year period. Okay, they're looking at a 3-year period, but actually in Brazil, Fiocruz was able to tender with the Brazilian Ministry of Health for a 10-year period, and behind that was actually a 10-year agreement with GSK for the full transfer of all technologies to do with that vaccine and the development of further vaccines for dengue fever, which is a healthcare problem in Brazil. So there needs to be, I think, a change in Russia around the procurement laws to give a longer period will give greater certainty to enable either the construction of more innovative facilities in Russia or for the tech transfer of technologies to Russian manufacturers.
So you're not going to use the word short-sighted, and I'm not going to use the word short-sighted either, but is it possible that this is something that applies more generally than it needs to have a longer horizon? We're talking about a government here, and it's usually the companies that have the quarterly horizon or the annual horizon.
I think it's again, perhaps someone else can comment. I think it is understood by the authorities. The question is, we've gone from 1, there's now 3 years being spoken about. Hopefully that can be expanded during this period whilst this draft law is being debated within the Duma, and using examples like Fiocruz.
Patrick, can I just bring you in on this general question of, is the environment clear enough for you to design a strategy? Don't tell us what the strategy is, after all. And then I'll bring Dmitriy in to give, let's say, a less international big pharma viewpoint.
I will be a little bit revolutionary in my statement. Already I heard in the hallway that because I'm growing a beard, I'm a little bit like Che Guevara. So I decided to be revolutionary in my answer. Frankly speaking, we know the models that can be developed. I don't think the issue is this. The issue is that markets like Russia give us opportunities to be innovative, not only in terms of the products that we introduce, but in terms of the business models that we introduce. Today, our industry is facing a very serious question worldwide of what is the future business model. Is our business model going to be continue to be based on molecules, or is it something different? And countries like Russia, where we do not have reimbursement for the full population, where the government-funded segment accounts for approximately 28% of the total market, are exactly the type of environments where you can hothouse or you can experiment with this type of initiatives. I mean, in a Western environment, in Western Europe or in the US, you have what I always consider to be the strange pharma model. It's not new for all of you in this room, where we call on a customer who prescribes but doesn't consume. The consumer doesn't pay, and the payer doesn't consume. So this is a strange model that we have had historically in pharma, based on a molecule which has I don't know, in the best case, 8-9 years of commercial life left. We know R&D productivity is suffering. So does that give us an opportunity to introduce a business model where the molecule actually becomes secondary? And countries like Russia offer us opportunities in that respect, where we can think about revenue streams where perhaps even molecules are not important anymore. Was that revolutionary enough for you?
It could be, it could be. I want to point out that Che Guevara is also not only a revolutionary, he's also dead, but that may be a small point for you to consider before you take your strategy much further. However...
But what a life it was, huh?
Oh, it was a great life, I'm sure. Are you suggesting experimentation with business models in Russia beyond the complication of the structural environment that you face?
No.
Because usually an experiment, and I speak of somebody who used to work for nature, you've got to control some part of the experiment.
No, all I was trying to say is that we have let's say, the standard approaches that my colleagues have already discussed, and I fully share with all of the comments that they have made. But in addition, I think there are also opportunities that we should look beyond what is the normal approach that we have had in pharmaceuticals. And I believe countries like Russia, where, again, I repeat, reimbursement systems are not fully implemented, and where people are used to paying for healthcare, are actually good environments where you can start thinking about what could be the new business model for pharma, which, by the way, is something that we are discussing globally across the board. I mean, you look at our business model globally, I can tell you a lot of companies are now thinking, what is the future of R&D in our industry? What is the future of our pipeline, etc.?
So you're thinking about building out the 28% as at least one place to start?
I'm thinking of using that opportunity to think about other business models, yes. And this is what the beauty of a market like Russia is.
Okay. Dmitry, can I bring you in at this point just to give, I don't want to call it a local perspective because everybody's a local perspective, but you understand the differentiation that I'm making.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite difficult to comment. As a last commenter here, for us, basically, there was never the question to be in Russia or not, because we have been here since, beginning of last century. So that's a little bit different approach. We are a Russian-based company, and of course, for us, everything which is happening in this market is more or less from the heart. We understand it very good, and of course, we get used to live in this environment. Moreover, I can say that from, for example, perspective of some of my German colleagues, Russian environment is even more predictable, like, for example, German environment. And they're claiming every, let's say, single quarter that, okay, new rules, new regulations, absolutely the same. Talks like we have here. So that means for me that basically the approaches which we have for strategy development is more or less the same in every single country. Of course, markets are different, factors are different, channels, approaches might be different, but yeah, we all considering the same issues in the strategies. So that's, for me, answering your question, is the Russian environment predictable enough to make the strategy? Well, yes and no at the same time. For us was always important to set up the right goals. I can give you, for me it was quite interesting to, the illustration. I just, when I cleaned up my computer last week, I found the very old financial model of NIZHPHARM, which were developed, I don't know, 15 years ago. It was, the horizon of the planning was about 20 years, which is nice for that time. I can tell you that basically the deviation, even now, is something like 25%, which is good. I mean, the actual numbers from the numbers which were developed 15 years ago. Of course, the way how we just achieved it completely different, but the goals were set up, people believed in these goals and trying to, okay, to achieve them, constantly changing and adopting the business model to changing environment. That's the key success for, at least for Stada here.
So one question with that would be, if you start any kind of model, any sort of planning, you can achieve your business aims against the model that you set at the beginning, against your business plan, and then you stop, or you're happy that you have achieved those. The question would be perhaps, and I speak as somebody who works for a public company that seems to set a financial target that's going to suit the market and then works that back through the various operational parts and achieves the end as far as the market's concerned. Are you going to optimize using that? You know, what's the way in which you now set a new strategy for the company? I'm not asking what the strategy is. I'm just making the point that if you're trying to optimize in the market, it's different than just meeting a management goal, which maybe your 20-year horizon indicated. But maybe I've missed the point you were making.
Well, in our case, there is no, let's say, standard procedure to do it, because I would say everything which is happening in this market is not standard. That's why it's probably not right to have this standard way to use the strategy. I can honestly say that we at the same time had a lot of so-called strategies, I mean the documents, which were never implemented, which is just put somewhere and okay, we forget about. I would say it's more or less okay, there is a specific, in our case, we are generic companies with the huge product portfolio, and it's okay, we have a lot of chances to change our behavior and to put this product or that product or that product or this market. That's why I would say that our horizon is a little bit shorter than in classic way. We're doing it once every 3 years and with the yearly update. So we're quite flexible on this, for this, yeah.
So I want to move tack slightly now from trying to prize some information out of the panel about individual company strategies and approaches and views of the market to talking about the industry in general, because at least in the markets which I'm more familiar with, essentially European Union and the US, the industry bodies have had a significant input into at least much of the local legislation. They're always consulted. You often can even sometimes discern the words that you've heard from industry in the legislation that appears and the regulations that come out. So my question is, at this point in time, and I heard from Vladimir Shipkov this morning that many of the regulations that you were talking, or maybe it wasn't your comment, but maybe you would agree with it anyway, that many of the regulations could be improved from having a more substantial or more significant or at least more orientated input from industry in general. So my question is now really, taking the individual companies aside and asking about the industry group, the mechanism for making that input into the legislative change that needs to happen still, How is that mechanism functioning? I'm sure Vladimir could come in as well if he was on the panel, but unfortunately not. So can I ask the panel to say something about how industry's input into essentially the state moves, the state actions can be made more effective than it is, or is it as good as it gets at the moment?
I think that there are some aspects to your question which we need to put into context. In the first instance, as late as 5 years ago, if memory serves me right, I'm thinking 2007, the budget for the Association of International Pharmaceutical Manufacturers was something like $400,000 or $300,000, if I'm not mistaken. And we had probably 3 employees. So obviously, when you put it into that context, and given the changes that we have had in the market, perhaps this was a lagging indicator. We should have probably improved. And we have done that. Since then, we have significantly improved our resourcing. When we benchmark ourselves now versus Brazil or China, Mexico, we are in a much better, Turkey, we're in a much better position. I believe that out of the BRIC MT countries, so BRIC, Mexico, Turkey countries, we are resourced at number 4 this year, which of course is not good, but it is not bad either. We would have been number 6 had we not resourced between the 6 countries. So that's the first point. The second point is, I would say that within the past 18 to 24 months, we have made significant improvements in communication, in interaction, and there has been a lot of coordination between the different associations, specifically in pharma, to try to become maximized in that respect. So in my opinion, there are changes that have happened. We don't particularly write about it in the newspapers and say, you know, this was us who did it. I don't think it's important, frankly speaking. The important thing is that the changes have happened. And they have happened in the way that our opinion has been taken into consideration. And I can say that this has happened in the past 18 to 24 months with more and more frequency. So I hope that this will continue into the future.
Does anybody else want to come in? Michael? Thank you.
A more general comment, which is, are we in the perfect place? No. Are we at ground zero? Definitely not. We're building capabilities within the industry association all the time. You know, we've got the resources. There's one thing having the money, but you also need to get the experience and make sure that the associations are fully tied into, you know, where that expertise is, albeit, you know, in country and above country. And, you know, we are making, I think, very good progress these days.
And how does the strategy, not the strategy, how does the policy that the industry as a group put forward, does that have to relate to policy that's present in you know, the US Association, the European Association? Do we need something that's kind of globally uniform, or are there Russia-specific approaches that need to be taken?
I work in basically in 2 biggest associations, and what I see is it's not typical that global policies would be, let's say, 100% adopted here. Of course, in every case, the adoption is needed for sure, because yeah, it's different country, different market, and different regulation.
But this morning I had the impression that there was a lot of reference to, you know, US FDA and so forth. And is this the model that's...
Yeah, probably one exception here, because probably one exception, of course, that there are the company standards related to, for example, compliance, quality, market behavior. Of course, this should be more or less similar and on the global level for the company in time.
We need to make sure not to confuse imperial style diktats around it has to be this way because this is how it is in the US or wherever. More a case of learning from best practice. This has worked very well because of X, Y, and Z, and then, you know, working out how to communicate those sensitively such that it fits within the local environment.
Are there various pushes and pulls within the association environment so that there are multiple associations, perhaps not always saying the same thing. Is there a coherence within the various associations here? I'm asking this question as a naive outsider, so. Naira, thank you.
Okay, we indeed have, in our landscape, we indeed have several associations, and maybe now we are in a phase of really understanding how to position each and every association. Because let's also look at our history, that all these associations have been created maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, when the landscape was completely different, when we didn't have really reimbursement at all. And then basically we were not thinking to have a unified voice for communication to those who are making really decisions. That is why I think so. My prediction is that in next maybe from 3 to 5 years, we will significantly consolidate our efforts in association, and maybe how I see it, that we will be having maybe one bigger central association, which will basically cover the majority of topics, expressing the majority of industrial players. However, I don't exclude that it can be also a small satellites around, which will be tackling a very specific questions. And I would like to add maybe a little bit coming back to the previous question, that also we need to recognize the efforts of AIPM as an association who made a very big difference for the last maybe 18 and 24 months indeed. And I think, apart from the financing and apart from the capability building, I think we managed to do also something which is very important. We managed to regain trust. I think this is the very, very important point, because I know that the entire world is struggling to really gain and regain trust in a dialogue with the healthcare authorities. And maybe if you look historically, it happens that in early 2005 or 6, this DLO or whatever suddenly came into our environment, and of course many multinationals, they significantly expanded their revenue stream because they had a portfolio to offer to the patients at that time, and it was seen maybe not in a very positive way. It was painted a little bit like making a profit way. However, so last indeed 2 years with tremendous effort, I think we are really kind of opening door and making dialogue, and today I think that the AIPM and in general industry has a word to say whenever we go to create something in regulations, something new.
You mentioned trust. Trust between whom exactly? Just clarify for me.
Yeah, it's a trust between decision makers and industrial players. Okay. And I think we have a ground for this trust, because of course decision maker can look at industry as those who are making profit, which is of course true. So we of course perceive them as those or the bodies who are managing cost, which is also true, fairly true. However, there are crossing points where we have a common interest, and this crossing point is patients. So both sides are really taking care of patients, and this is a common platform where we can offer a partnership and we can cooperate our efforts for the sake of the patients.
In Europe, at least, and the US, the patient is a vital part of building that trust back up again, because I think it's not just here in Russia where the trust has been a barrier. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry elsewhere is also dealing with that same issue. Is it possible to use the patient participation and patient group mechanism in this country also to rebuild some of that, so that you're, and also I guess you're connecting then the policy of health improvement with the industry group, the pharmaceutical industry group? Nothing, Patrick? Reluctantly.
Yes. So I'll be a little bit revolutionary again. I think you have to be careful here, because there is a very fine line between helping patients and at the same time being seen as exploiting patients. So I feel a little bit ambivalent about this question, because clearly in some cases where patients will be benefiting from treatments or from medications, probably from an ethical point of view, it's the right thing to do, because obviously if the patient doesn't receive treatment, he or she may die. But on the other hand, you have to be careful that, like always in human activity, it doesn't become exploited to the point where we lose trust, credibility, etc. So I would say let's be a little bit careful on how we interact with this.
So moving on to what may be the final topic of the conversation here, going back to really what the companies do for themselves, we've spoken about the industry umbrella organizations and that representation. I'd like to get some input, if I can, from you on, in terms of influencing what needs to be done and lobbying. Is it, who is listened to? What's the most effective way of getting your messages across? Is it through the local companies, the local Russian companies, or is it through the Russian representatives of international companies, or even is it some message from the big corporate offices, HQs in Europe and the US and Japan, whereby they say, well, we'd really like to come to your market, but and we could invest this, but we can't because. Where does that message best come from? How is it best represented? What are the tactics in mobilizing the industrial voice into the argument? Michael, could you kick off for me, or how does GSK work these things out? How much of a voice do you have to persuade them to operate from corporate HQ in this?
I guess it depends on what it is you're wanting to influence on, really. Whether it's, if it's the local office, if it's the regional office, if it's your CEO or the board people coming. I mean, certainly within GSK, the emerging markets is a key focus for investment. It is no longer as good as impossible to get a board member or a CEO to visit. These days, they're very interested. But likewise, you have to use those occasions appropriately. If you get them coming for smaller points, then it's a waste of that. So, to answer your question, what are the best tools? It depends on what it is you're trying to influence on, but certainly there is the interest, and ultimately it's down to actions. It's actually what you physically do in the marketplace. If you're seen as, we had this morning, if you're seen as a friend of Russia, if you're active, if you're investing, if you're developing your organization and your people, if you're collaborating locally, then you can have a voice and be heard.
Nenad, as the other representative of a UK-based company, at least in some parts of the company.
My
what do you
comment
think?
is how to deliver, and I will connect a little bit the previous question and this question. It depends very much what is the topic, and we have in common across different associations a lot of things that basically it's potential issue or a challenge, whether you work you're a member of IPM, you're a member of Russian producers, you're a generic or innovative companies, and that is probably some of the things which is related to, as I said, regulatory, manufacturing, clinical trials, which are the things that are mostly aligned globally, or at least across Europe, across all markets. And then you have things that are different and will be specific for Russia, which is pricing and reimbursement, where a different association can play different role in order to achieve the common goal, which is, bring that medicine to a patient in order to improve his health. And so for the first part, it's basically it's not relevant which one, probably the strongest one or most influential, or the one that brings the most members together, so that you have a little bit of power behind you when you go and sit on the table of
safety in
the
numbers.
government. And then, specific issues, then it's probably selective to which organization is specialized in. And that is probably something that we might not do that yet, but would be good to map out what is our common ground that, we suffer all, or we benefit all, or the patients would benefit, and where are the different interests, I wouldn't say conflict, but the different interests where we have to find a way we will represent that and come with then in a compromise way to the solutions that can enable us to be on that market.
You almost seem to be saying that you could mold the strategy around a particular disease area because the patient demands in that disease area would be presumably more uniform instead of trying to do it on a healthcare-wide or a disease-wide perspective. Actually, if you brought the companies together who had products in a particular area and did it in that way, is that what you were getting at, or have I?
It's part of. You can also say that, how the government will value innovation, how the government will enable broad market access to the medicines, what will be the government policy in terms of pricing and reimbursement. These are some of the probably individual part that best suited association can go and sit. But there are then a lot of things which is a common ground where we need to understand that we are playing in a global world, and Russia as a country cannot be an island in the sea with a different rules and regulations, because it's simply not possible. That today globalization is so integrated in our processes that if we want to be in this country and we want really successfully solve some of the health issues or health challenges of this country, we need to integrate globally these processes. Otherwise, we simply cannot bring the product to the market.
The regulations may be globalizing. I'm not sure that the patient populations are globalizing yet at this point. I mean, maybe we're getting towards that. In other words, the health demands in a particular country are not the same from country to country.
Yeah, I agree on that, but you will see, and you see, is more and more developed markets are getting, or so-called westernized disease burden is also disease burden in the emerging markets.
Yeah. Steffen, can I bring you in on this? I know that Merck has an arrangement in China whereby you're deliberately repurposing some of the older Merck portfolio, not repurposing necessarily, but remarketing in a new territory. Yeah. Is that one tactic that could be applied here that you would expect other companies to put more emphasis on? Or will we see it with Merck?
Yeah, no, that's true, but a little bit coming back to kind of the messaging, where is it more effective coming from? My comment on that, or based on my experience over the years, I think the most powerful way, if it's a mix of locals and international companies, because as we heard this morning, pharma is one of the key drivers of innovative growth in this country. And if that's the case, if the key word is innovation, I think we as global companies have a lot to offer to Russia. By the end of the day, anyhow, in that respect, we have the global experience to offer. So in general terms, I think the best is a mix of the two, right? For good reasons, local companies have a strong foothold. Yeah. That's obvious, but I also think we have a lot to offer in that respect, right? So that would be my comment.
Dmitry, obviously your perspective is going to be a little different. The HQ is here. It's the same lobbying action or not?
Well, it's good to ask the second largest producer here, is it nice to have production facilities or not? Of course, again, there was no option for us, and our business model is, I would say, full cycle. It is good to have here, let's say, a new production unit. I'm just starting from this end, because it gives you flexibility, of course, but it's more or less specific of Stada. Again, generic company with huge portfolio, most of each is produced only for Russia. So for us, there is no option. But if I would be in the shoes of the person who would make this decision now, I mean, just to go for this, let's say, prolongation of business model, invest in production facilities here or not. As in previous year, I'm still quite calm about it because from strategic point of view, and also from financial point of view, I see no big advantages to invest in this, again, in production facilities. I'm not talking about the presence on the market, of course, it's nice to be here, but for go deeper, it's a little bit questionable for me.
So Patrick, do you have any other revolutionary thoughts on the question of how Sanofi should be shaking the tree here?
No, I support my colleagues. Just wanted to add one more point. I think your question was, how do you try to influence the agenda?
Yeah.
And just add one more point. I think in a market where the biggest company has a market share of, I believe, 7%, this tells me that partnerships is one of the ways that it should be done. Partnerships in several forms, whether it is through the industry association, whether it is commercial partnerships, whether it is other types of partnerships. But clearly, you know, when the biggest company has a 7% market share, that tells you a lot that the power of one company to influence the agenda is probably rather limited. So I think that's the only thing I would add.